Good morning. Let me thank the program director for the kind words of introduction. I was not sure that it was still myself with a long list of things that were mentioned. I'm sure many of you would know a gentleman who used to be a host in SAFM, Tim Modise. Tim Modise hosted a prime slot program in the evenings with SAFM. So shortly after one of the elective conferences of the ANC, I think it was the Polokwane one in fact, he had the opportunity of interviewing the Secretary General of the ANC, whose name is Gwede Mantashe. But Tim Modise, being Tim Modise, referred to him as Gwede Mantashe. And so Tim was waiting online. Good evening, Mr. Mantashe. And then you could hear some disruptions on the other side. And eventually when Mr. Mantashe picked up the phone, he then said, good morning, Tim and your listeners. And it was past 7 in the evening. And Tim insisted, should it not be good evening, Mr. Mantashe? He said, well, Tim, when you speak with an audience for the first time, regardless of the time that day, it remains good morning. And so, good morning. Program Director, thank you very much for this opportunity. There's always an expectation with a keynote address in terms of the depth of issues it addresses, the length of time it takes, and I'm going to resist that temptation. And let me start by acknowledging the President and the Board of SASCE, with all its stakeholders and important guests who are here, and commend the leadership that went into thinking about hosting this WIL Africa Conference. It is a conference that we fully support as the National Skills Authority. Of all the things that go through our agenda, there are things that remain in our agenda for 3, 4, 5 times, going through the board, subcommittees. I don't know what was the magic with the presentation on us supporting and collaborating on WIL Africa. I remember very well, it took less than 5 minutes. It is probably because we immediately saw a strategic fit between what was presented as the purpose and that which we set ourselves to do as the National Skills Authority. And we don't want to believe that we are the first ones to go through this route. Those who came before us already in 2010 in the National Skills Summit, there was an acknowledgement that human beings are at the center of development. With human beings at the center, being at the center of all development, education and skills development is an enabler for the fulfillment of all other dreams we have about South Africa. We know that our mainstream development agenda has various priorities. You talk about infrastructure development, you talk about renewable energy, or not necessarily renewable energy, an energy mix that will resolve our energy challenges. There are challenges of human settlements. We have now officially entered a window where water is a scarce resource. And I'm mentioning all of those to argue a point that we can say all we like about those until we address education and skills as a tool to enable the unlocking on the delivery of all of those other priorities. We're not going anywhere. That on its own then positions education and skills development not to be an end on its own. Education and skills development is not an end because it empowers those who receive education and skills development so that they do what? So that they enter the labor market, they use the skills to come with new solutions to the challenges that we have, some of which would use those skills to start their own businesses and thereby resolve some of the challenges that we have in society. When we talk about education and skills development not being an end on its own, of the many differences we have in South Africa, at least there is something that we agree on, that every workplace must be opened as a training space. Every company must be a training space. Every government department must be a training space. Every factory floor must be a training space. When you have challenges of the proportions that we have of youth unemployment, you can't be in the business of business for doing business so that you generate profit and enjoy it. The high levels of youth unemployment becomes essentially a threat to the prospects of that business thriving. And I always argue this point, not as a threat, but just as a warning signal, that those who are unemployed, who continue to be young people, will be patient with us up to a certain point of understanding that why can these things not be done? Why am I not in the factory floor using my energy? There's a point when they will cease to understand. There's a point when they will run out of patience. At that point, they will no longer be saying, those who have, share with us as those who do not have. They will be voluntarily saying, we as those who do not have are voluntarily now sharing our poverty with you, and that will not be a nice thing. Just as a warning signal. State-owned companies can continue to do business as usual. They should have an added responsibility, which is developmental in nature. And if there is anyone who should be leading the pack in absorbing large numbers of placements of young people under WIL, it is the state-owned companies. Now, in the context of a developmental state, a state would do things that it would not do under normal circumstances. In the context of a developmental state, business would do things that it would ordinarily not do as business, as being responsive to the development discourse in our society. The running theme, which we all agree on, of turning every workplace into a training space, finds that fit with what is articulated as the purpose of WIL. So already, we are starting WIL from a position of strength that everyone is agreeing. And therefore, we must move with greater pace, not in exploring conceptually and all these big words how this should be done. We must just wake up one day, roll our sleeves and do it. Practice will be the greatest experience that we can draw and correct from there. We don't have the luxury of that time, of a perfect concept theoretically that will articulate what do we need to do with WIL, how best do we implement it. Do it. I come from a school of thought of action, reflection, action, cycle, and including lessons there. When the National Skills Development Strategy 3 was introduced, we argued that we are introducing a significant shift from a numbers game of quantity with greater focus on the impact that skills development must do. It should be an indictment in our society that with all these years of the national skills development discourse, we are still crying about skills shortages in delivering some of the priorities that we have as a society. In the National Skills Authority, we argued that one of the measures of impact of the NSDS will not be how many young people went through the training, but to what extent does the NSDS contribute in helping us achieve the employment equity, for example. Skills development continues to be one of the gaps on why we are not achieving employment equity. And both those acts, Skills Development Act and Employment Equity Act, they are what, 17 years this year. And so, including the Minister of Higher Education, when he wrote the foreword of the NSDS, he did emphasize on the greater need to improve the placement of TVET graduates and graduates from universities of technology in the factory floor. The National Skills Authority is genuine about its cause for supporting WIL. We have previously recognized contributions that have been made by various players in the space of WIL. And I'm also glad to announce as well that we already have a standing board decision on hosting Work Integrated Learning Awards in March 2016. And we want to use those awards to mobilize all the necessary stakeholders who should be behind WIL. We want to mobilize the entirety of government. We want to mobilize business. We want to mobilize civil society. We want to mobilize trade unions and argue one point: that for as long as you are not given an opportunity to apply or practice what you have been taught, you are still not educated. Education for us is the acquisition of that knowledge and the skills and the practical application thereof in the real world of work, which WIL so perfectly provides an opportunity for. We must continue to mobilize more and more partnerships. We must bring sitters closer to the table. The triangle between the employer, the sitter, and the training providers must be our bigger focus. A sitter is a sitter because it has companies that are under that sector of the economy which would be under that sitter. It should be no rocket science, therefore, that sitters should play an added role of mobilizing those companies to open their spaces to absorb or place young people. I learned that wholesale and retail sitter has about, 12 or 13,000 companies registered with it. How many? I'm hearing 82 here. Whatever that number is, I like this 82. If If there are 82 companies that are registered under that SETA and one company takes at least one young person, it means 82,000 exposed to the world of work. And of course, they will not have, that wholesale and retail SETA will not have the money to can place all those young people. That's why it should be made acceptable that those who are lagging behind must not sit on top of the money when there's still a huge responsibility and obligation that has to be achieved. The cost must not be about whose money is doing what. It must be about how best do we collaborate at a strategic level, institutionally and programmatically, to make sure that that which we exist to achieve is achieved. Not for the glory of the institution that we lead and work for, but for the glory of those that we exist to serve. And that should be our preoccupation. Our skills development discourse can start and end a conversation without any reference to the learner. But the discussions on WIL are centered around the learner. Other skills development discussions can talk about the strategy, institutional mechanisms, all those things. Financial modeling, all those things. With the remaining 15 minutes, thank you very much. When we mobilize stakeholders, we must not be allergic to understanding what is the plight of these young people that we seek to address. Equally, we must open ourselves up and understand what are the fears of business by opening their doors to place these young people. And if needs be, there must be increased investments to make it easy for business to place these young people in their factories. It should not be a burden on them and them alone that they are placing these young people. Because for the contribution they are making, there is an obligation that comes with that. And that obligation is to make sure that they do not just brush the surface in transferring the skills and the experience to those young people. The National Skills Development, the National Skills Authority has already kickstarted the process. We have had various meetings. We have had a full cycle of our board meetings. We have had a full cycle of our subcommittees. We have had a meeting with the Minister of Higher Education and Training. We have had meetings with all SETAs, the chairpersons and the CEOs. We have had a meeting with all provincial skills development fora. Last week we were in Parliament. The common denominator across all those meetings is that we need action and more action. And when we consider the new architecture of the NSDS, we must ask critical questions about what are the catalysts that need to be introduced in the skills development landscape that will change the complexion of skills in our society. And I want to invite all of you to take time and make contributions in the NSDS, in the discussion documents that are out, including the institutional design of SETAs that will be suitable for the purpose that would be articulated in the strategy. Let me close by saying we are grateful for this opportunity and wish all those who will be getting the awards all of the best. Diabulela.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.